Bob White never begged for money. He simply existed on the edge of the city, as if he no longer expected anything, but also didn't want to burden anyone. Always on the same block, sitting on the same bench, with a worn-out blanket folded beside him. People in the neighborhood knew him. The pizza delivery guy greeted him. The laundromat girl left him coffee on the sidewalk. And even though he was invisible to the authorities, he was noticed, not by noise, but by silence. What made Bob different from other homeless men wasn't just his composure. It was the way he watched the world, with eyes that seemed to have seen everything. He never caused trouble, never asked for help, but never looked away from those who disrespected him either. Some kids called him Mr. Soldier without even knowing why. Maybe because of the way he always sat upright, like he was still on watch. Or maybe it was just that rare childlike instinct to feel what adults forget. And it's funny how fast the world rushes to judge those who don't fit in. People saw Bob and assumed he was just another lost soul. But if they'd stopped for 5 minutes, they'd notice the details. The worn but military boots, the perfect handwriting in the notebook he scribbled in, the way he looked at the sky like someone memorizing escape routes. The truth is, Bob wasn't a drifter. He was a fallen hero. It's just that no one remembered. And that's when everything begins to change. Bob White wasn't just a veteran. He was a survivor of Fallujah, one of the fiercest battles of the Iraq War. Anyone who was there knows. 2 days without backup, grenades going off feet away, and he was steering a convoy through the chaos like the mission was a natural extension of himself. He returned decorated, respected by his entire unit, with a scar on his leg that told half the story. The other half was still ahead of him. Back home, he thought the worst was behind him. But the real fight came when his wife Margaret began to fall ill. Strange fevers, constant fatigue. The VA hospital, trusted by so many, dismissed it as a minor virus. Months later, they discovered it was advanced cancer. She passed quickly, too quickly, and Bob, who had never left a man behind in the field, found himself alone, surrounded by papers, protocols, and regret. He couldn't summon the strength to fight that new kind of enemy, indifference. He sold everything they had, donated every penny to Margaret's favorite charity, and vanished, not running away, but saying goodbye. To himself, maybe. Because there are wars that don't leave visible scars, they rot you from the inside. And Bob, a man trained to survive the impossible, eventually surrendered to silence. The city became his new battlefield, but there, no one saw a soldier, just another forgotten face, until hunger knocked again. That freezing November night, Bob hadn't eaten in 3 days. His body shook, but he still walked upright, like a soldier in a silent march, refusing to collapse. As he passed Mr. Morelli's grocery store, he saw an old loaf on the shelf, looking as tired as he was. He slipped inside, waited until the owner was distracted, and tucked the bread into his coat. It was a desperate move, not violent, but there's no room for nuance when security mirrors scream first. "Hey you!" Morelli's voice cut through the air, already dialing his phone. Bob froze. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He just whispered, "I just needed strength to live one more day." When the officers arrived, the younger one noticed the dog tag around Bob's neck. "You served?" he asked gently, almost apologetically, while cuffing him. Bob just nodded, eyes low. There was no resistance, just exhaustion, the kind that doesn't sleep, even in warm beds. At the station, he was treated like any other offender. Fingerprints, booking, a distracted public defender. The system doesn't have time for biographies, only case numbers. On paper, he was just another repeat petty thief, another no fixed address. But what no one there knew was that this man had a past even the judge in that courtroom would never forget. And right there, in that moment, justice, by fate or by miracle, was about to remember who Bob White really was. Bob appears in court, wearing the same clothes from jail. No one notices him. Not the public defender, not the audience. He's just another name, another case. The judge hasn't recognized the name yet. Everything is treated with bureaucratic coldness. The courtroom was lukewarm that Tuesday morning. People came and went, cases were read, decisions made with the speed of someone stamping without thought. Bob White entered in handcuffs, still wearing the wrinkled clothes from the night before. Head down, beard unkempt, and that same heavy silence. No one looked at him twice. To most in that room, he was just another homeless bread thief, just another case that would be forgotten before lunch. The public defender barely knew his name. He skimmed the file out of obligation, not interest. He didn't ask why Bob stole. He just wrote, "Repeat offender." The prosecutor adjusted his tie, ready to request pre-trial detention. And the judge, Carmichael, read the documents with the detachment of someone who's seen it all. Bob White was printed right there, but it sparked no recognition. Not yet. Just another number in the system. And sometimes that's the world's real tragedy. The rush to ignore stories. In the gallery, journalists focused on a higher-profile case scheduled next. Lawyers murmured. Even the bailiff scrolled his phone. Bob looked around and realized that no one truly saw him. Not even the judge, who unknowingly owed him his life. The entire scene was a theater of indifference, where every actor had rehearsed apathy. The only one carrying the weight of reality was the man on trial. And it was only a matter of time before that name triggered a quiet earthquake. The judge confirms Bob was the hero who saved his life during a battlefield attack. Bob had vanished after the war, carrying deep trauma and living forgotten. Judge Carmichael was used to quick decisions, but something that morning stuck in his throat. Back in chambers, reviewing the paperwork, he paused on Bob White's file. Former soldier, 3 deployments, 1 in the Battle of Fallujah. Bronze Star. It sparked a memory he had buried for years. Then the name White B. It hit him like a mortar blast, echoing in the minefield of his memory. With trembling hands, Carmichael opened a drawer and pulled out an old, fading photo, nearly sacred. A group of dirt-covered soldiers, faces marked with fear and grit, and there in the back, rifle slung over his shoulder and a makeshift bandage on his leg. It was him, Bob White, the man who had carried him nearly 2 kilometers under enemy fire when he was bleeding out. Back then, all he heard was the name Grady shouted in chaos. He never saw him again, never knew who he really was, until now. The judge sank into his chair, 2 decades crashing onto his chest. The man he was about to judge as a petty thief was the reason he was alive. While the city slept, Bob had been fighting invisible battles, crushed by the same system he once served. Carmichael called military contacts, every line in the file checked out, and suddenly Bob White wasn't just another forgotten soul. He was a living debt, a silent reminder that justice may fall asleep, but memory does not. The judge refuses to ignore the truth. A renowned attorney steps in, military witnesses testify, and the state discovers an administrative error that wrongfully cut Bob's benefits. The judge publicly acknowledges Bob, and all charges are dismissed. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Something had shifted in the air, even if no one could explain it. Bob's old public defender was replaced by a sharply dressed man with calm authority, Richard Harlow, from the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. "Someone's taken an interest in your case, Mr. White," he said, planting hope in dry soil. Bob nodded silently, still confused. For the first time in years, someone spoke his name with dignity. For the first time, someone cared to listen. Judge Carmichael entered with misted eyes and a firm but heavy voice. Before reading the charges, he called the first witness, Colonel James Mason, standing tall in full uniform. "This man saved 17 lives in Fallujah," he stated, including that of a young field medic now known as Your Honor. A wave of whispers swept through the gallery. People looked at Bob as if seeing him for the first time. Then came the documents, battle reports, medals, eyewitness accounts, all real. And with them, a bombshell. A bureaucratic error had cut off Bob's benefits for 15 years. The state owed him over $200,000 in back pay and medical care. But more than that, it owed him justice. Carmichael took a deep breath. "Mr. White, I didn't recognize your face. But you're the reason I have a family, a career, and a life." The prosecutor, visibly moved, rose. "The state drops all charges with prejudice." Bob didn't react. He simply closed his eyes, just for a second, as if finally allowed to rest, even though the scars within would take longer to heal. Bob reunites with his niece and becomes a national symbol of delayed justice. He receives shelter, friends, a memorial, and a fund is created to help forgotten veterans. The story exploded across the nation. Forgotten Veterans Saves Judge, has name cleared in court. Bob's face, once ignored on street corners, now filled headlines, feeds, and evening news, but he seemed unaffected by it all. Sitting on the same sidewalk as always, a young woman approached him in tears. "Uncle Bob?" It was Rebecca, Margaret's niece. "We looked for you for years." She hugged him tightly, the first human contact he'd had without handcuffs in a very long time. Within 48 hours, a fund called Justice for Our Own was launched. Donations quickly exceeded $200,000. Old comrades sent letters, videos, memories. Bob was given a room in Brooklyn's Veterans Village, modest but with a warm bed, a clean blanket, and a photo of Margaret on the nightstand. Beside it, the medals he never asked to wear now glowed softly under the lamp, testaments to a man finally being seen. For the first time in years, he had keys in his pocket and a place he could call home. A memorial rose in front of the courthouse. A bronze sculpture of Bob carrying a wounded soldier, Judge Carmichael, under the American flag. Next to it, a simple plaque. "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." Children took photos. Veterans stood in silent tears. And Bob just sat on the same park bench as always, but now he wasn't invisible. He was a symbol, and without saying a word, he showed the world what it means to endure when the world has already given up on you. Bob speaks on Veterans Day. Kindness is never too late. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for it. A powerful ending that closes the emotional and moral arc of the story. Silence hung thick in the auditorium at Fort Hamilton as Bob stepped onto the stage. He wore his ceremonial uniform, medals finally pinned to his chest, not out of pride, but out of justice. The room was full of young recruits, gray-haired veterans, families, and officials. Bob hadn't rehearsed a speech. He simply looked out at the audience and said, "One day, I protected this country. Today, this country protected me back." The pause between each word weighed more than any prepared speech ever could. He continued, voice steady but eyes glistening. "Kindness is never too late. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for it." It wasn't just a pretty phrase. It was the summary of a life that had survived being forgotten. A life that walked the streets as if asking permission to keep existing. Bob didn't ask for applause, but he received a standing ovation, the kind that rises from the soul. Even the youngest recruits could feel this was a lesson no classroom could ever teach. And that's how Bob White, the man who once slept on a cold park bench, now warmed hearts with his presence. He didn't become a celebrity. He became a reference, not of greatness, but of resilience, of faith amid abandonment, of justice that even when delayed still matters. But his story doesn't end here, because sometimes when someone is finally seen, they begin to see others too. And Bob still had something important to say to the world. Now let me ask you this. How many Bobs have you walked past without ever truly seeing them? How many times was someone's silence actually a cry for justice that no one heard? The truth is, we live surrounded by untold stories, and maybe yours is still waiting to be remembered. So tell me, have you ever seen justice arrive late, but be worth the wait? Have you ever been judged before you had a chance to speak? Or better yet, do you know someone who deserves to be remembered? Drop it in the comments. Because when you share, you don't just tell a story, you restore dignity. And if this video touched a part of you that still believes in humanity, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stick with us as we uncover more of what the world has tried to forget, but urgently needs to remember.